In the spring of 1916, Portugal confiscated German naval vessels that were docked in Portuguese ports. The world was at war, and Portugal was desperate to keep trade with its biggest foreign market, the United Kingdom. The guns of August had found its next target, but all that seemed like a world away from the quiet town of Fatima. Lucia dos Santos and her cousins, Francisco and Jacinto Marto, were watching over their family's sheep when reportedly a lady appeared to them, dressed in white. The three children claimed to have seen this apparition 6 times. The lady had told them of the end of the Great War, and that on October 13th, 1917, the lady would appear again, reveal her identity, and perform a miracle so that all may believe. Tens of thousands of people gathered to see the sun dance in the sky. According to Lucia, the apparition told them that 2 of them would die young. Both of her cousins perished in the 1918 global flu pandemic, something that many people today, sadly, can relate to. Lucia later went into a convent, where she lived to the ripe old age of 97 and passed away in 2005. Whenever people talk about the religion in their fantasy works, they always mention the one thing that separates fantasy religion from religion in our world is that people know that the gods exist in the fantasy world, but in the real world, you can't be sure. Well, tell that to Lucia dos Santos and see how far you get. I believe this statement showcases a gross misunderstanding of how religion works in our world and how it should work in fantasy. I love religion. Its concepts and history, the art, the quiet poetry, and the loud celebrations. Like anything else, it has a bright side and a dark side. I like to engage with religion both academically and to place myself in the position to think like a believer. I like to approach religion assuming its internal truths, as opposed to getting bogged down in the somewhat irrelevant details of whether or not it's real. That being said, I also understand that religion is a cause for trauma for so many people. It would be willfully ignorant on my part and insensitive for me to just gloss over that. Anyone who studies history can discuss a plethora of wars, atrocities, and hate that have been perpetrated in the name of religion. And there's much apologia in regards to religion's cause or use as a justification for violence or hate. That is a worthy conversation to have, but not the topic I wanted to discuss today. We are talking about how religion is depicted in fiction versus its reality. Some of what I say here may seem like Catholic apologetics. That is not my intent. I do believe that all religions are far more complex and nuanced than most people consider them. While I have studied comparative religions both personally and in an academic setting, I may get things wrong. I'm sure that there will be comments down below stating just that. This video is not the end of a journey. It's just the start. What I want to do here is not defend religions or institutions, many of which are deserving of heavy critique at the least, and judicial punishment more often than not. I simply wish to showcase the realities of certain aspects of religions to illustrate points. But if anyone should question my intent, understand that I could, without further need of preparation, go into dozens of accounts of various atrocities, crimes, and terror instigated by religious institutions with a specialization on the Roman Catholic Church's history. This ranges from child abuse scandals, profiteering off the Holocaust, inquisitions, crusades, mistreatment of neurodivergent people, hypocrisy, torture, death, and in my distaste of every pope that existed in my lifetime. Yes, even that one, I have receipts to show all the terrible things he's done as well. I've seen people in my life use religion as a tool to justify their own immorality and prejudice. I am choosing, with this video, to simply look at the certain aspects that I find lacking in fantasy representation of religion. The rest is a topic for another time. Knowing how to put religion in your games or fantasy is like looking at a finely crafted wristwatch. You can understand the gears, the springs, the hands, know of the craftsmanship that went into the design of the dial. But you must also appreciate the art and the context, because a watch tells you many things, the least of which is what time it is. Similarly, religion can do so many things, the least of which is salvation. Hey, if you like what I'm doing here, please be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Share the video with your friends. Also, you can support this channel on Patreon for added benefits, like getting to see the videos early, access to my Patreon Discord, and your name in the videos. Additionally, I used a lot of sensitivity consultants to review the script, and the advice that they gave was invaluable. I will list them at the end of the video. However, if there are issues, errors, omissions, or problematic statements in this video, those are entirely my responsibility. I have ultimate editorial discretion, and mistakes are a reflection of my errors, not those who are trying to help me out. I'm not perfect. I may have left mistakes in there or said something incorrect. Feel free to correct me in the comments down below. I am always looking to learn more and improve my understanding of world religions and any topic. That being said, let's talk about some magic. The reality of fiction. Magic is not real. That statement seems uncontroversial on the surface, but that's the thing with magic. The whole point seems to be that nothing is as it appears on the surface. The coin disappears, the coin reappears. We understand that it's a trick, right? We're intelligent, knowledgeable people. We have discarded the foolish, gullible minds of our ancestors and believe in logic, science, and facts. Now, what in the world that we live in made you come to that silly conclusion? If you wish to see evidence, look no further than your television screen, to YouTube, to social media, to the post that your aunt keeps wanting you to read. We are not now, nor have we ever been, a species persuaded by evidence. So why do we think of fantasy in this way? Why do we assume the surety of the fantasy world and their interaction with their gods? No two campaign worlds are the same. Even if you're out there using the Forgotten Realms or Dragonlance or whatever other setting directly by the book,
if we go by the book, hours could seem like days.
It is different from the same setting used at another table. I find it hard to believe that anyone runs these worlds entirely by the book anyhow. What evidence do we have that religions of the D&D world are true? Is it the magic? Magic operates in fantasy worlds like a form of science. Like my phone. Look, I don't understand how any of this stuff works in the slightest. Yet, it does. And someone gave me an explanation that I accepted because it conforms to my view of the world. Some authors even pride themselves on the fact that their magic systems are just that. Systems that operate within rules, like magic systems in a game operate within rules.
Smokey, this is not Nom, this is bowling. There are rules.
And can I just say, Sanderson's books are too long, and length is not equal quality. There, I said it, I can't finish those books. And Pat Rothfuss's books have some glaring problematic elements in it. I could go on and rant about that for a long time. It wasn't always like that. Tolkien never had an explanation for his magic. The Ring of Power just did stuff. Stuff that made it precious. But there are people in our world now that believe in magic. Not like this, but actual spellcasting magic. And you may scoff at them, but I'm not sure how casting spells is that much different than praying. And you may scoff at the 6.8 billion people in the world that are religious. That's your prerogative. I'm not here to tell you what you should believe. I'm a former cradle Catholic. I got no leg to stand on. It's a tired cliche in a suit. It's a nice suit, but I digress. Religious people believe it, and we like to differentiate belief because of evidence or logic, but it's far more complex than that. Think of your average person in a fantasy world, not the hero, not the villain, the shop owner, the farmer. Very few, if any, people actively interact or see the gods. Not everyone gets visited by Zeus in the form of a squirrel. And there are plenty of people who have claimed or claim today that they speak to or have visions from the divine. Some folks use a pejorative term for those people, calling them words I'm trying to push out of my own vocabulary. But others follow those people as the leaders of their faith. It is said by those who believe that Moses spoke to God, that Muhammad spoke to God. Some believe that David Koresh spoke to God. And if you don't know who David Koresh is, he founded a religion. They were called the Branch Davidians. Davidians. Sounds better than Davidans or Davids. You can Google them. They don't really exist anymore because of a siege the ATF and the FBI did on their compound in Waco due to allegations of abuse and the alleged stockpiling of illegal weapons. It did not end well. How is the cleric of Pelor receiving a vision from her deity different than the hundreds of people at Fatima who swore the sun danced in the sky and saw a vision of the Virgin Mary appear to the children there? To the common person of Faerun or Portugal, not much. We wouldn't have the tools we do today to explain away that claim. Every religion has stories of the miraculous. Moreover, every people in the world have explained things that occurred with some supernatural causation. The northern lights are called Aurora Borealis, named after the Greek gods of the dawn and the north wind. Mental health issues were caused by demons, or bad health was caused by blocks in a person's chi. It feels like spiritual ableism. Is that a thing? Did I just coin a concept? Probably not. Things that we can explain away with various sciences today, but were believed to be caused by the supernatural. In fact, many people still believe this to be true today. I remember working in car accident cases in New York, where people would go to a myriad of doctors to show their aches and pains that they swore were caused by the accident that they had. The state of New York has a ton of insurance fraud. And I'm not talking about the stuff like insurance companies call insurance fraud because of the sense of, like, they just want to deny everyone's claim. I mean clinics that are supposedly above car mechanic shops where there are no doctors and people just sign their name and leave. It's an entire industry there. And the insurance would take reports and pay for what was called traditional Chinese medical evaluations. These would come with diagrams of a person's chi flow and where it was being impinged. These documents would then hold up in court, even though they would never hold muster in a scientific journal. Police forces still will utilize psychics in their police investigations. Sylvia Browne was famous for working for the police, often boasting about being 85% correct and helping with the resolution of plenty of cases. However, multiple studies done both during and after her lifetime repeatedly found that she failed to provide any information that was verifiable or useful in a single investigation. And yet, even after those reports were published, police departments would still utilize her. She was a charlatan, but people still believed in the magic of what she said. This was after she was literally convicted of fraud. And even the healing clerical magic found in games have real-world parallels. The most obvious of these would be laying on hands. The ceremonial gesture that I have personally participated in within the Catholic tradition actually dates back to Jewish traditions. Adjacent to that would be the Cajun traiteurs, faith healers that would lay on hands, mixing folk religion with Catholic tradition, which is actually pretty common throughout the world, but we see a lot of in pop culture with relation to the Caribbean. It's also used in other faiths throughout the world, but the specific Christian version was the basis for its inclusion in D&D. You can see this on TV. It looks like they're literally casting spells on their congregation, blowing their believers backwards with the force of divine healing. You will see people discard their mobility aids, or declare their pain is alleviated, or their cancer is free. Now, there's a discussion to be had about the ableism in that situation, but that may be for someone a little bit more qualified than me to discuss. And if you think healing potions are a pure fantasy development, may I direct your attention to Lourdes, France. The Catholic faith long has a tradition of holy water. Good for fighting vampires, these fonts are actually found near the doorways of every church I've ever seen. People are baptized in them to cleanse their sins. In 1858, a 14-year-old girl named Bernadette Soubirous reported seeing 18 visions of a young lady near Lourdes, France. Much like in Fatima, crowds made the pilgrimage to Lourdes, and the waters of Lourdes are said to have healing properties. Lourdes itself reports 6 million visitors each year. Claims have been made for 7,000 miraculous cures, but only 70 of those have been recognized by the church. Of those, 65 happened within the first 100 years. But since, in the last 70 years, only 5 have been recognized. Reports decline significantly as scientific medical knowledge has increased. And considering that there are millions of visitors every year, and have been for over 100 years, the chances of a miracle are less than 1 in a million. But people still believe. They still take the waters and give them to the sick. I know. My family did it too. Sadly, we weren't one of the lucky ones. Even if you don't embrace that, just consider the long history of bad medical practices that have occurred over the centuries. Bleeding, leeches, balance of humors, just to name a few. These practices have as much scientific backing as anything I've mentioned above, but people believed it, practiced it, swore by it. To your farmer outside the major city of Baldur's Gate, a healing cleric may be as rare as a physician to a farmer in the 13th century French countryside. Their experiences of this proven magic people profess about would be no more real than the storybooks. Hell, most medical knowledge is beyond my understanding. I'm not really sure why Tylenol helps with fevers or headaches. To my understanding, it might as well be magic. Pill works because person in fancy white robes, lab coat, says it does. I took pill, it did what person in fancy coat said. Also side effects. Side note, it would be amazing if spell had side effects. This kind of sounds like something Dungeon Crawl Classics would do. I can imagine a cleric right before a healing spell reciting to another party member, "Cure wounds can lead to nausea, indigestion, mild hallucinations, and suppressed libido." We sometimes forget. The vast repository of human knowledge wasn't readily available to everyone. I often consider the elephant and what medieval researchers thought it looked like. Might as well have been a dragon. Some of those drawings are pretty goofy. And even if you believe the modern world has discarded these superstitions, what makes you think a medieval fantasy world would do that? That faith to them would be based in any way on rational conclusions based on replicable experiments? This notion seems so foreign to me, as is the idea that people would not have conflicting viewpoints on the same issue just because they have access to the same evidence. You can talk about fringe groups that have beliefs that are not backed by the leaders in scientific fields. Think about flat earthers or COVID conspiracy theorists talking about hydroxychloroquine. But even without looking into the fringe groups and their disagreements with conventional wisdom, apparently scientists disagree on the amount of vitamin D that's useful for humans. Far less sexy than the notion of climate change, but it's still an issue where there's conflicting evidence. As Thomas Kuhn noted in the Scientific American, while we talk about scientific theories as proven or unproven, in reality, science is far more complicated. One theory may be better in some ways. It might be easier to work with, for example. A competing theory might be better in another way. Perhaps it can predict more accurately. Different scientists might care about one aspect more than another. As a result, they might come to disagree about which theory is better. And who is to say that one person's prayers are not answered by the intercession of another god? Just because the magic happens doesn't mean it's from the god that they prayed to. Understanding the mechanism isn't required for the method to work. Remember how I mentioned that I'm not sure how Tylenol helps fever or headaches? Well, according to Tufts University professor Alan Shaughnessy, neither does the pharmaceutical community. But it works, so we keep repeating the process. And there are some competing theories. Most are probably wrong, yet it works. You may say that's a little different. But let me bring up some Catholic theology that I don't think people actually understand. One of the most famous biblical quotes of all time comes from John chapter 14, verse 6. "I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me." And many Christian sects will cite this as the reason why they have the belief that only Christians will enter heaven. Saint Cyprian of Carthage wrote in the 3rd century, "Extra ecclesiam nulla salus," or outside the church, there is no salvation. This seems to be the general idea held by many outside of the church of what the Roman Catholic Church actually believes. And it's also what I was taught when I was in my Catholic education classes. But being an insufferable know-it-all like I am, I got into an argument with my teacher over this. In fact, Father Leonard Feeney, an American Jesuit priest in the early 20th century, stated the same. He went so far as to say that only Catholics went to heaven. And do you want to know what the Pope did to Father Feeney for saying this? He excommunicated him on February 13th, 1953. He threw him out of the church. Under Feeney's own beliefs, the Pope had condemned him to hell. It was the whole bell, book, and candle. By the way, does anyone else know about the bell, book, and candle thing? I love this idiom, and I'm sad that folks don't use it. Bell, book, and candle refers to the part of the excommunication ritual where the bishop, because only bishops can excommunicate, except in special circumstances, but I don't feel like getting that deep into the paint here, where at the end of the ceremony, the bishop rings a bell, closes the holy book, and snuffs out the candle by throwing them on the ground. The candle represents the chance of forgiveness, as it can always be relit. Anyway, Pope Pius XII even translated the edict to English himself to make sure that Feeney knew what it meant. Can you imagine the ecclesiastical shade of writing something in Latin, the language of the church that all of the clerics should know, then translating it just to be sure this one person understood what it meant to eliminate the confusion of translation? This was actually pushed by the Pope because the idea that only Catholics would be allowed into heaven was considered anti-Semitic. And as Christians, the Catholic Church would not hold the old belief that the chosen people would be condemned. Quite the reversal from the Inquisition age. Of course, certain events from the 1940s in Europe changed a lot of the old sentiments in Rome. In fact, during the Second Ecumenical Council of the Vatican known as Vatican II, which was a massive reformation within the Church, they issued the Decree on the Relationship of the Church to Non-Christian Religions, which was approved on October 28, 1965. It addresses the Catholic Church's new position regarding the religions of Islam, Judaism, Hinduism, and Buddhism specifically, and other non-Christian religions generally, stating, quote, "The Catholic Church rejects nothing of what is true and holy in these religions. It has high regard for the matter of life and conduct, the precepts and doctrines which, although differing in many ways from its own teaching, nevertheless often reflect a ray of that truth which enlightens all men and women." So while the Church holds to it being the correct and true Church of God, and that Christians are destined for salvation, it also states, quote, "All this holds true, not only for Christians, but also for all people of good will, in whose hearts grace is active invisibly. For since Christ died for everyone, and since all are in fact to one and the same destiny, which is divine, we must hold that the Holy Spirit offers to all the possibility of being made partners, in a way known to God, of the Paschal mystery." End quote. And under this belief, the miracles performed, regardless of if the words spoken in prayer were to Vishnu, or to the Path of Enlightenment, or to Odin the Allfather, were performed by God as a way to bring blessings onto humanity. One way God shows his divine love to creation. So if this is how the world's largest denomination of the world's largest religion views miracles and salvation, why wouldn't the clerics of Pelor believe that the clerics of Coralon Laurentian could heal with their prayer? The power of that healing actually came from the benevolent Pelor. It's not that far-fetched. It is the reality of how religions are perceived to work in our world. Plus, how fun would it be to be in a session, role-playing a scene between two clerics of opposing faiths, and the party's cleric heals a fellow PC by praying to Pelor, and for the other cleric to say, "Ah yes, Flotus works in mysterious ways, oozing with condescension. Delicious." The cosmology of D&D. D&D does not have different types of faiths. It is one type of faith, with many, many, many gods. It is an interesting type of cosmology. This is a world of magic, but also a place where you can raise the dead, reliably. It is a world where you can enter the plane of existence your soul would be sent to after death, not only through the act of dying, but with your physical body. Even bringing equipment and gear. This is a world where you can become a god. This then prompts two questions. First, in a world where you can become a god, what makes a deity worth worship? It feels more like worshipping a CEO of a company or the leader of a nation than something divine. They can be made. They can be defeated. They can be killed. What are the prerequisites for worship? Second, in a world where the gods still get to determine the destination of your eternal soul, does that actually matter at all? Is that the only prerequisite that truly matters? But then, you can go to these places. You can retrieve your loved ones. You can escape the plane of existence and go on to another one if you choose to, and have enough power. Then again, if you are a farmer, merchant, maybe even the ruler of a nation, but lack the magic or martial prowess to pull these amazing feats off, does it matter? Heroes can challenge gods. But normal people are just that. Normal. They are not heroes of legend. What could they do in the face of the divine? I would love to see more D&D where the existence of other deities is just denied as false. As discussed before, this would make sense even with the mechanics of the world in question. And there is some precedent in D&D for this. Flotus was one of the first deities created for D&D. There is an idea in his lore that the followers of Flotus deem him as the only true god and deny the existence of all the other deities. They're also belligerently opposed to other religions existing near them. Does that sound familiar? It is ironic that someone who, at the time, was a Jehovah's Witness would be accused of creating a recruitment tool for Satanism and witchcraft. To be clear, the Satanism and witchcraft being feared here is largely a non-existent creation of the minds of Christian groups and not actual organizations or religions. Not to state that the Church of Satan or religious witches don't exist, but not in the way that Christian groups portray them. Foreshadowing. Oh my god, he's gonna say it. Let's put a pin in that. Religion was an afterthought in the original game. While the cleric was one of the initial classes, with an explicitly religious core to it, Gygax never considered what religions would be in the game when they started playing, and it kind of shows. As a default, the players started utilizing Norse pagan and Greek gods, even including some of the gods from the books that they enjoyed that stood as a template for their D&D games, like Crom from the Conan series by Robert Howard. Gygax didn't want to include real-world religions in his fantasy world. Quote, "Saint is not a term that is exclusive to the Christian religion, and Saint Cuthbert was more than a joke than otherwise, considering the advocacy of pounding sense into someone's head by the dint of blows from a club. I do not advocate for the use of actual religions in RPGs. Any references that I have made to Arab-like civilizations do not include any hint of Islam in them. The same holds for Judaism or Christianity. As a matter of fact, I did not write deities and demigods, nor do I use it in my campaigns." This was in response to the inclusion of the first deity he put in a Greyhawk, Saint Cuthbert. And for those who don't know, Saint Cuthbert was a real person. He was born in the 7th century in Northumbria, which is an area now in modern Scotland. Alfred the Great, the person credited with coming up with the idea of unifying England into a singular country, said that a vision of St. Cuthbert is what inspired that idea. Personally, I've always loved including St. Cuthbert into my world's pantheons, specifically as the actual St. Cuthbert, who was transported into a D&D world and became a deity by accident. He continually tries to convert the D&D multiverse into Christianity, fails, and is frustrated that he has become a deity as opposed to the god that he actually worships. Sadly, the real life of St. Cuthbert doesn't have a club that he hits people like his D&D counterpart. Then Gygax decided to fill the rest of the pantheon later, stating, quote, "The development of anything akin to the logical pantheon of deities for the world setting took a considerable period of time to complete, because we seldom dealt with such entities in play. St. Cuthbert and Flotus were amusing to the players with cleric PCs, so I spent time detailing them. The balance then followed as I brought into play evil deities to serve as villains and to frustrate the aims of the PCs." End quote. Of course, the current official setting for D&D isn't Greyhawk anymore. It's the Forgotten Realms. But it isn't like I could just find the creator of the Forgotten Realms, Ed Greenwood, and ask him about his creation, right? Right. What? Is someone calling? Who's on the phone? Really? I am honored today to be joined by the creator of the Forgotten Realms, a little personal hero of mine since I was a little kid reading his books. You could say Elminster himself, the illustrious, the one who needs no introduction, Mr. Ed Greenwood. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Hi, thank you for having me. I'm just a guy. It's okay. Hi, I'm Ed.
The thesis of this video is about how religion is depicted in fantasy and in Dungeons and Dragons in general. You created the realms. The realms predates D&D as a game.
Yeah, by a decade or so. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's not like this was something that was tacked on to the D&D framework. It's quite the other way around. It was D&D was tacked on to the Forgotten Realms framework. How did you go about establishing how religion works in the realms?
Well, okay, from the beginning, and here's where I split with TSR and later WotC right away, I wanted the gods to be a sense of awe and wonder and mystery that mortals couldn't quite understand and know a god. They might think they did, particularly if the god spoke to them in their head when they were awake or in their dreams when they were asleep. They had a personal relationship with a deity, but they didn't quite understand the whole deity. There was awe and there was wonder. And in my realms, the gods walked around as avatars very seldom. People might talk about that time that Torm strode the streets or whatever, but usually wasn't a thing within their lifetime or that they had seen. It was always something they'd heard about from a traveling tale teller. What people saw was manifestations. So if a god approved of something, a rosy glow would come out of nowhere and surround you if you were doing Lathander's bidding, or your hands if you were committing an act that Lathander approved of. So from the beginning, I posited that we had a polytheistic world in which everybody believed in all the gods. So faith meant that you trusted in a god to listen to you, to do what you want, not belief. And the other thing is, you worshipped all the gods. Some of them just to sort of, I'm in a woods. I better thank the Seldarine and ask them if it's okay if I can walk through their woods sort of thing. Everybody believed in all the gods. It was later, and you can see that in the issue 54 of The Dragon, as it was then, when I'm trying to tinker with a full pantheon to make it fit the D&D game. And the D&D game posits one important thing about gods. If we're going to be heroes, be masters of our own destiny, as adventurers, as player characters, the gods cannot be infallible, all-knowing, and all-seeing. They have to be superpowered, near humans with human flaws. And you're seeing the wiggle room. Priests being wrong, pushing propaganda, deities lying to their priests, and the priests turning around and feeding the lies to the population. We also have priesthoods as mortal organizations trying to support themselves and do things. And you have the secular aims, like let's corner the market in ambergris, or let's corner the market in porcelain and make lots of money.
Are there changes, like glaring things that were changed by TSR or WotC that kind of rubs you the wrong way, or something that's like, oh, that's not something I would have done?
The two things were bringing the gods on stage over and over again directly and killing off Mr. Every 5 minutes. Portfolios, to me, even though I instituted them to the game, I didn't have them quite so cut and dried. Many TSR and now Wizards designers, they grew up in a monotheistic, there is one God. So they're continually saying to, yeah, I know there are all these gods and we believe in all of them. Which one is mine? No. You believe in all the gods. Unless you're a cleric or a priest or a paladin or others or zealot, you believe in all the gods. No, I get that, but which one is mine? It's like, no, you have to break out of your monotheistic thinking to understand the realms. That's number one. And number two, kill the portfolio thing. You're overusing it. Don't think there has to be a god of, left-handed monkey wrenches. The portfolios aren't cut and dried. You can have 3 moon goddesses at once, which we do. Also, lazy storytelling to always have the gods be behind everything and the fate of the world hanging in the balance. It's time for your player characters to take responsibility. This leads into a real world problem where somebody tries to control somebody else's life or change the laws in a society or dominate the way things are habitually done in a society. But instead of taking personal responsibility, I would like you all to live in one man, one woman homes and raise 2 children, 1 male, 1 female, and nothing that doesn't fit this mold. Instead of saying, I would like you to do that, so I'm taking responsibility for spearheading this change or push, I'm going to say, God did it. So it's God's word that and it's the divorcing of personal responsibility into, I'm going to use faith as a weapon to control other people.
So I wanted to give you an opportunity to give any sort of closing thoughts that you had that you definitely wanted to make sure we get included, and also to plug your channel, where we can find you, all that sort of stuff.
The best place to find me is I have a Patreon. There are Realms Lore videos and stuff there. I have a Discord, Greenwood's Grotto, where I answer questions and various Realms fans hang out and answer each other's questions and provide recipes and all sorts of other fun stuff. So, and that's free. So Discord, Greenwood's Grotto. I have a Facebook channel with lots of videos. So if you want to be entertained by me going, yak, I'm on Facebook too. And you occasionally can reach me on Twitter at @TheEdverse. Think about what you're doing in life. Make moral choices. You'll feel better. No matter how badly life goes, you'll feel better because you chose things. You had agency. You chose to go to that hockey game. You chose to walk down that street. You chose to go and buy milk instead of waiting till tomorrow.
You see, we come here for world building advice and to discuss these concepts. We get life advice on top of that.
Hey, I think I'm alive. Just check. Yeah, I think I'm alive. So, I can talk about anything. Shutting me up is the problem, not the talking.
Thank you so much for taking the time out today. I really appreciate it. Like I said, folks, you can check out the YouTube channel, Patreon, Twitter. All of those I'll have linked down below, so you can check that out. And in the meantime, let's get back to the video. That's not polytheism. Just before the light of the sun kissed the streets of New Delhi, a devout Hindu went to their temple to offer milk to a statue of the god Ganesha. After ritualistically offering the drink to the statue, the practitioner was surprised to see that the milk was disappearing. It appeared that the statue had consumed the offering. News spread throughout the country and world that day, and throughout the next day, statues of Ganesha were consuming milk offerings. After the 21st, reports of the statues drinking slowed to be reported until the phenomenon seemed to stop entirely. My best friend actually tried this, and the statue appeared to drink. It happened again On the 20th and 21st of August 2006, just days after Mumbai experienced the waters of the Mahim Creek, a seawater beach, had become sweet to drink. My God is more powerful than your God seems to be the echoing of a schoolyard taunt waged at a cosmological scale, yet it is the order of the day in most fantasy worlds and games. You may see the temple of this god or that god as they rival with the temple of this other god. The problem is, that isn't how polytheism works. Polytheism is a system where there are many gods, yes, but those gods are generally not individually worshipped with any real exclusivity. Sure, there are temples to specific gods. Angkor Wat was built as a Hindu temple dedicated specifically to Vishnu, but the largest current Hindu temple in the world is actually in the United States. This New Jersey temple is primarily a Krishna-focused temple, but has a number of different shrines within it, dedicated to various deities and manifestations. After speaking to a few polytheists, a common annoyance that they brought up was the idea of devotion to a single deity. One wouldn't pray to the god of rain if they needed help with a disease. It just doesn't make sense. It is similar to the concept of saintly intervention in the Catholic Church. You wouldn't ask for the intercession of St. Jude if all you needed was to find your car keys. Now, there are, as always, exceptions to the rule. In Hinduism, you could send prayers for rain to Shiva or Krishna, and there may just be a specific ritual for that. Hinduism has a large variety of ways to practice. Now, if you're a deep diver into D&D, you know that there are polytheistic pantheons within the game. For instance, gnomes have a number of deities outside of Garl Glittergold, like Baravar Cloakshadow, gnomish god of illusions, or Flandel Steelskin, the gnomish god of mining, or various deities in the Elven pantheon. These can be found in the sourcebook Faiths and Pantheons, or Powers and Pantheons. Ah, hell. Monster mythologies. So, the concept of various gods existing but not being part of a unified pantheon together, rather they are in competition and openly hostile to each other, is not polytheism. It's henotheism. Henotheism has a rich history. What's funny about this is you can find trace elements of henotheism in some famously monotheistic religions. Thou shalt have no other gods before me. It's one of the 10 Commandments, and it seems to indicate that there are other gods. The golden calf comes to mind. Or, God standeth in the congregation of the mighty, and he judgeth among the gods. Seems to tell a similar story. And it's interesting to put Judaism in this historical context. Reviewing antecedent Semitic religions, you can see traces of various stories coming from polytheistic origins. Many times, the polytheistic nature of these prior religions has no bearing on the compatibility of whether the parable or myth was adopted, but it still serves to showcase where Judaism's theology evolved from. As religious historian H. Keith Beebe puts in his book, The Old Testament, quote, "It seems clear enough from the evidence that Moses was not a monotheist. Yet to call him a polytheist seems inaccurate too. We can conclude that Moses stood somewhere between totemism and monotheism. The term to describe this position is henotheism." Judaism separated itself from Canaanite polytheism about 3,000 years ago to embrace monolatry, then transitioning into monotheism, but little clues still exist in the writings. Those writings persisted. However, you see less of it as you move along. While the commandment seems to give you a little wiggle room on the existence of other deities, there is no God but Allah and Muhammad is his prophet, leaves very little to the imagination. Speaking of Allah,
The name of God. The name of God.
does it actually matter by what name you call God? Yes. Yes, it does. Consider this.
One nation under Allah.
Melanie, welcome to our panel. Melanie, let's start with you. What do you think about this?
My jaw dropped.
Yeah.
Mine with yours.
That's an absolute disgrace.
Now, why does this upset folks? Well, one, because these folks are news pundits, paid to be upset, and they feel that the change somehow undermines the meaning of the pledge. But there's a little bit more to it than just that. Now, folks will point out in the comments, even though I'm mentioning this right here, right now, in the video, that Allah is simply the Arabic word for God. They are correct. I mean, you can still comment that down below, and we will all tell you how knowledgeable you are. Yay, engagement. But why is it that when Muslims, speaking in English, refer to the supreme deity as Allah, and not just God, as the English word is? That depends on who you ask. See, some Muslims state that Allah is used as the personal name of God and does not refer to other gods, the concept of gods, or any other use aside from discussing the one God in Islam. Now, this God is the same God as the other Abrahamic faiths. However, the term Allah predates Islam. Pre-Islamic polytheists use the term in various ways, and non-Islamic monotheistic Arabic speakers use the term to denote the deity as someone would in English when they use the word God. However, language and Islam are linked. The Quran is written in classic Arabic, and I remember when I was a kid, I was in this interfaith hangout where a Catholic priest and an imam discussed the various differences between the two faiths. One of the things that the imam pointed out was that, for him, the only version of the Quran that was real was in Arabic. Translated versions were fine, but cannot be used for true interpretations of the religious text. Judaism has obvious links to Hebrew, but also its offshoots, Yiddish and Ladino. In fact, disputes on Hebrew translations have had effects on other religions. Any biblical scholar worth their salt will discuss how much confusion, argument, and even death has been caused due to the possible mistranslation of words in the text from one language to the next. Considering the anthological nature of the Bible, yes, anthological, I don't care what you think, it is a word pertaining to anthologies. Anyway, different sections were written in different languages. Probably a mixture of Hebrew, Greek, and Aramaic, making the choices of translation very tricky. The use of the word in one text translated into the same word used in a separate text when translated from its original language could inadvertently cause a huge definitional shift that modern readers would not have a clue about. Then folks get really upset, and some folks get burned at the stake. So when we discuss religion, we need to consider the word itself. We can define that word in English. We can ask another person to define that word in English. However, if you're talking to someone in a different language, you generally have to use equivalents. Here's a weird example from my childhood. My mother's Korean and would say the word aegu all the time. I have a memory of looking up this word in a Korean English dictionary that we had, and the first definition stated, "Good heavens, I've lost my watch!" Now, this is a colloquial term that is used as an exclamation, close to, "Oh my!" But the word doesn't translate into any actual corresponding phrase or exclamation. If you took the phrase, "Oh my," and translated them into English, you would have two words that are meaninglessly jumbled together in a way that doesn't make sense to anyone speaking Korean. The words are not where the meaning derives, but the way that it's used. See also, que lástima. Now, imagine the translator's dilemma on religion. We've had a hard time defining it in our own language, so imagine asking the question of someone in a different language. They may have a concept that is close, but not exact, and we just start to use it as a translation. For instance, the term zhongzhao is used to discuss religion today in China. However, that term was invented by a 19th century Japanese philosopher who was trying to make up a word for the Western concept that they didn't have a word for. And that word was religion. I was speaking to Izendale and Specter on the Asians Represent Discord about Confucianism and its view as a religion in modern China and Taiwan. And they remarked that if there isn't a figure that is being worshipped, then generally it's not considered a religion in China. We also agreed that even with that definition, there seems to be exceptions to their own rules inside the cultural zeitgeist there. So when discussing what counts and what doesn't count as a religion, our language is already making barriers that are culturally significant. Buddhism is framed an odd way in the West, even starting with the name. This is true of Confucianism as well. As you might imagine, practitioners of the religion don't refer to themselves referentially to the name of the originator. This isn't about a cult of personality surrounding that person. Christianity does this specifically, and Christian writers usually have applied this method of naming to the practitioners of faiths throughout history. Christian writers first referred to Muslims as Mohammetanos, which later evolved into Mohammedan, even going so far as to refer to Islam as Mohammedanism. Christian writers assumed the religion would focus on the founder, so many of the terms we have in English today start from that assumption. The one thing I have not really seen in fantasy is the idea of different people using different names to refer to the same religion. You don't see people referring to themselves as the label of the religion. Pelorians or Grumsh Denominations usually say the whole phrase, worship Pelor. There are divine beings in Buddhism. They are not gods in the Western sense. Then there's not a huge emphasis on gods. Like Confucianism, Buddhism is much more interested in the self, personal growth, and enlightenment. Mind your own business. It can be jarring from someone coming from a deity-centric religion to even consider these non-deity-centric religions as religions at all. I also find it fascinating that while Buddhism is thought of as a Chinese or East Asian religion, its origins are in Nepal and India. Much like how Christianity is thought of as a Western or European religion, but its origins are in the Middle East. I've never seen a fantasy world play with the idea of an exiled believer. A religion that began in one location but was pushed out, either by pre-existing religions or a subsequent religion. There's a lot of cultural ownership in these religions, even with their foreign origins. And I will never cease to smirk when I hear about Western civilization defenders discussing its superiority to the cultures that originated the religion that they view as a pillar of their own culture. They took the ideas from the other culture to follow, now view themselves as better. It's amazing. It's a complete lack of historical self-awareness. Fantasy games never discuss the power of language in this sense. It used to. With alignment languages, there was an attempt to go into it, but many religions are so intrinsically linked to language. Hebrew to Judaism, Latin to Catholicism, Arabic to Islam, and games never discuss the origin of religions, how it molds history and culture, how it forms the way we speak. In Spanish, the word for goodbye is adios. In French, adieu. Both mean to God. In Korean, the greeting and farewell, 안녕하세요, literally means to be at peace. Even in English, while the word good does not come from God, the farewell, goodbye, does come from contracting God be with ye. Namaste in Hindi means I bow to you. I can see where cultures promote a creator God and which cultures promote personal peace from their language. You can almost tell a religion by seeing how they greet you. What is the dominant religion to a culture through their colloquialism? None of that is ever reflected in a D&D game or fantasy universe. I speak of these examples because those are the ones that I know, and I'm sure that there are tons more throughout the languages of the world. The faith of a region shapes the regions in different ways. Consider this when developing your own worlds. I can always tell when it's an afterthought, like in a world like Greyhawk, because the religions and cultures don't reflect each other. Religion feels like it was applied after the fact. I know folks who know the names of the days of the weeks in their world, but the religions and pantheons are just slapdash applications of default D&D religions or applying real-world religions like the Greek or Norse pantheons, which still have followers, by the way. Like, there are still modern practitioners of Hellenistic polytheism and Norse paganism. A new temple was built in 2019 in Greece to the Olympian gods, and Norse paganism has been recognized as one of the official religions of Iceland since 1973. Hi, I'm Legal Kimchi, and I like tangents. So be mindful of the choice of religions, because it should shape the world and cultures, not just act as set dressing. It creates and conforms to a society's concept of good and evil. And speaking of evil gods. There's a lot that can be said about the concept of evil gods. They exist throughout various pantheons, and we could spill a lot of ink in discussions as to whether an all-powerful god, given the evidence of atrocities and tragedies that exist in the world, would be an evil god inherently due to the inactions in the face of injustice. It is a foundational question of religion. If God deemed it good, can it be evil? Is good or evil independent of the gods? Is there a higher power than the divine? As a child in a very Catholic household, I often wondered why people would worship Satan. It didn't make any sense to me. If you accept the universe where a creator god exists and an angel rebelled, why would you side with the loser? Moreover, it's an unwinnable position. But of course, I was a child. I didn't get it. I think many folks still don't. See, the idea of Satanism, the cult of people who actually worship Satan as a counter-deity and wish to empower him to somehow overcome a creator god and rule in torment and misery, isn't real. And it never really was. The witches burned in the Inquisition and witch trials were accused of being something that doesn't really exist. That's not to say that witches, witchcraft, or related religions never existed, but rather the concept that people held in their minds of what witches were never existed. It was a tool wielded by those in power to exert that power over others. Person in the workplace starting rumors about another person being lazy. Spiteful belligerence. Before the 20th century, nothing remotely like a satanic religion ever existed. Now, before you hit the comment section with your well actuallys, there's not much evidence to show that any satanic cults that worship Satan ever existed prior to the 20th century. There are tons of claims, and some who viewed Satan as a heroic and tragic figure, but that was more in the artistic sense rather than the religious one. Even the Church of Satan and the Satanic Temple don't actually worship Satan, nor do they believe he exists. I really hate to break this to you, but most metal bands don't either. I know. It's okay. I still like listening to ghosts sometimes too. It's no big deal. The closest thing that I could find to the worship of an evil god that actually existed was the Turkic god Erlik. Even then, he was seen as the god of judgment and the ruler of the underworld, a god of death that in some tribes was worshipped as a protector of people from evil spirits in the lower world that caused sickness and misfortune, and in other tribes it was an evil deity seen as a leader who caused those evils. So even here, it's hard to pinpoint if this was an evil deity being worshipped or different interpretations coming to a head and making an image of it, when actually it's down to interpretation of the deity. And that is the kicker. It's down to interpretation. Think about it from just the news. Look at the modern religions of the world. Look at news covering Islam after 9/11, or how Mother Teresa is viewed by various groups. You can see contrasting views of these faiths and believers based on perspective. Maybe propaganda, maybe nuggets of truth. But to be honest, truth has very little to do with it, nor does it even have to make sense. Looking at the hatred experienced by smaller religious groups, like the Sikh or Jewish people, you could make up something nonsensical and apply it to a religious group. Space lasers, anyone? It's easy to show examples throughout history of people fighting and hating other people because of their god. But why do you need a god to begin with? A humble submission for your review.
Man is humble. Kneels before God.
So God, capital G, and gods, lowercase g, are concepts that are not universal. There are faiths without any deities at all. There are faiths where deities are not the central figure. Hierarchy is the foundational idea of most deity-based religions. I think this also leads into many people's issues with religion, whether they realize it or not. The people I know that are very religious, especially with deity-based religions, are people who are culturally, professionally, personally okay with hierarchies. I must be clear that this is anecdotal and not conclusions drawn from statistics, but the language used in the Abrahamic religions is kind of centered on servitude. The faithful are often referred to as the servants of God, in some instances even slaves to God. The common Arabic suffix abd is a term that is technically slave. You can see it in common Arabic names like Abdul. However, in the context of use within Islam, it has a different connotation than the original meaning. For instance, in Islam, it is a choice to become a slave to Allah. I think that in the common English parlance, it would be more accurate to state that what a person chooses to do in an Abrahamic religion is to submit to the will of their God. It's to be submissive. We don't kink shame here. Submission to a god is a near universal theme in deity-centric religions, and so much spilled ink in digital screen space has been dedicated to arguing this point. I'm sure someone will point out how Islam, Christianity, or some other religion that I didn't even discuss will talk about how it isn't really like that. The god loves you, and your relationship is not like a servant or a slave or even submissive. But the practical nature of how Islam and Christianity specifically handle the god-believer relationship does resemble that of one being subordinate or submissive to the other, and not in the way where the submissive has the real power. Regardless of the language used, no one is stating that the god has the lower end of the power dynamic. Except in the comments down below, because this is the internet and there's always someone who is going to argue that point. Whatever. It is interesting to look at the dynamics established in this relationship. It's also echoed in how many fantasy works, D&D included, look at religion. It is a give and take. Almost a contract, which is something I know a bit about. It's almost transactional in nature. I serve you, you give me things. A gift of healing, salvation, blessings. This can lead to interesting story interactions between the deity and the believer, and has been used in various fantasy media. But it isn't the only way, nor is it the only way to show a conflict through religion. I bring up the Buddhists, for example. While there are divine beings that are venerated, none would really fit into the Western idea of being a worshipped god. As such, the conflict is usually found within the person. Look at the Four Noble Truths, the central idea of Buddhism, and how easily one could see the conflict with accepting and living out those ideals. I use that as an example, but you can establish any ideals for someone to adhere to. Conflict is created in the difficulty in adhering to those concepts. As a note, Buddhists are not all peace-loving and accepting folks either. There is a long history of violence perpetuated by members of all faiths to members of another faith. Some have been so total that they genocided other religions out of existence. No one's hands are clean. This is not an excuse for current behavior. And some acts throughout history are clearly far worse than others. But just be mindful that history is long and full of atrocities. But considering the transactional nature of the deity to believer relationship, it's funny to me that certain faiths are so eager to get you to sign on the dotted line. They're selling the product. Imagine, you just found this new show or book. It brings you so much joy that you need to talk about it. It's more than the casual "you should check out this show" situation. It is the singular joy that you feel when you've found your thing, like your specific thing. For me, it's D&D. For others, it's Star Trek or Star Wars. People make it a large part of their personality. Now, imagine that, but add a wrinkle, that if you don't like it, you will be eternally punished. Torment that is unimaginable for the rest of eternity. There's a lot to be said about the nature of proselytizing, trying to make converts of people. On the one hand, you have the problem of preaching, the inherent colonialism of the idea. You're basically saying my culture is better than your culture. It's akin to ethnocentricity, and it is difficult to see how messed up an idea it is until you take a few steps outside of yourself. You get into circular logic when you try to examine it without thinking about that. Why is your religion the best? Because it's true. Why is it true? Because my religion says that it's true. Why is my religion worse? Because it isn't true. Why isn't it true? Because it's not my religion. You're pushing an idea of superiority, and much of the spread of religion in the real world is because of that feeling of superiority, to give grace to the savage, the heathen, to make people more like you. There's an element of control in it. Especially if there's an institution that benefits from the level of control over the faithful. And while I think this thought has merit and there's a lot to ponder here, it's even more than that. The individual missionary does not do what they do primarily to exert cultural control over a potential convert. And here is the notion that is difficult for the non-believer to wrap their head around. If you have a faith that requires belief for eternal paradise and condemns non-believers to torment, then you must convert people. It's a moral imperative. The consequences or actions that lead to that conversion are ancillary to the act of converting someone. Any mortal injury in coercion pales in comparison to the utter agony of eternal damnation, saving them from a fate worse than hunger, disease, and torture all put together. That is the odd mentality of the missionary. To fail to convert people means condemning them to hell, a fate worse than death, the worst possible fate. If you have any compassion and hold this belief, proselytizing is a mandate. Failing to do so is a cruelty. That's the mentality. That's why you get the archetypal character of the zealot. It's a slippery slope, inherently. However, it is a somewhat rare feature of religion. It's odd to say this because the two largest religions in the world, Christianity and Islam, which combine to number over 4 billion of the less than 8 billion people who live on this planet, are two religions that are focused on spreading their faith. This likely contributes to the fact that these two religions cover more than half the world's population. But looking at the rest of the world, the religions of India, Buddhism, Hinduism, Jainism, Sikhism, they don't proselytize. Judaism doesn't proselytize. This is a pervasive concept in these religions that conversion has to be done through the independent free will of the convert. That isn't to say there are no exceptions. Emperor Ashoka, no, not that one, this one. Anyway, Emperor Ashoka of India did send out missionaries to convert people to Buddhism, but that sort of missionary advocacy was rather rare. While there are religious wars that affected the religions I just mentioned, we don't see the conquest, conversions, forced conversions, or proselytizing on the scale that you see with Christianity or Islam. and various people within the groups have different opinions on the matter. Orthodox churches have had the same biblical mandate to spread the word, so to speak, but they aren't active about it like Catholic or Protestant churches, because not all groups within the church are the same. Which reminds me,
Let's talk about sex, baby.
There exists an idea in early Christianity that split the religion in two: exiles, excommunications, and possible murder. It's the theological conflict that remains to this day. On one side, the Catholics, Orthodox, and historical Protestant churches. By that we mean Anglican, Lutheran, Methodist, basically the churches that came out of the Protestant Reformation. On the other side, the Jehovah's Witnesses and the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, or LDS. You may know the church by its more colloquial name, the Mormons. This dispute arose from the teachings of Arius of Cyrenaica. Arius was exiled from the Diocese of Alexandria for his views. When Emperor Constantine gathered the original Christian bishops to establish what the tenets of this new faith were in 325 CE at the Council of Nicaea in what is the current modern-day city of Iznik in Turkey, they established the doctrine in direct opposition of Arius' views. The famous Nicene Creed, still recited in Catholic Mass to this day, includes the first two stanzas that were designed to denounce what they viewed as an evil and heretical idea that was an attack on the very Christian faith. Constantine even tried to reconcile with Arius, setting up the Synod of Jerusalem to restore Arius to communion with the church. Bishop Alexander of Constantinople reportedly prayed for Arius to be struck down by the hand of God before he could enter the church, and on the way to the church, Arius collapses and dies, just as the bishop prayed for. While some claim a divine attack, historians claim poison. Either way, what was this grievous sin that this man committed to deserve either divine retribution or assassination by enraged clergy? Arius stated that Jesus was created by God as his son and was subservient to God, whereas the church stated that Jesus had been eternal and an equal part of God, which to an outside observer is about as important as the number of angels that can dance on the head of a pin. For these are the things people fought, argued, killed, and died for in the early church. These disputes are common in religion. In Islam, you see two different sects between the Sunni and Shia Muslims. They derive their differences between successors to Muhammad. Buddhism is separated into various schools of Buddhism, some regional, like Tibetan Buddhism, and some based on certain texts or teachings, like Ikayana Buddhism. There are dozens of major schools of Buddhism throughout the world. Hinduism has no central organization as the authority, and the divisions are based on various schools of Hinduism, with their own traditions and beliefs. Quote, "Unlike other religions in the world, the Hindu religion does not claim any one prophet. It does not worship any one god. It does not believe in any one philosophic concept. It does not follow any one act of religious rites or performances. In fact, it does not satisfy the traditional features of a religion or creed. It is a way of life and nothing more." End quote. The Supreme Court of India. If you find a religion of a certain size, you will find a split. Sometimes it's due to a major issue that separates the sects into an almost new religion, but other times the denomination is subtly different. We've discussed the Roman Catholic Church. We call it that because it's the distinction between it and the Catholic Church. See, within the label of Catholic, there are a number of churches that all look to the Pope as their leader, but not all of them are part of the Roman Catholic Church. This is news that's pretty odd to some people. My first experience with this was the Syro-Malabar Catholic Church. Syro-Malabar is an Indian Catholic church with over 4 million practitioners. The church I grew up with in Houston actually shared a building with the Syro-Malabar Catholic parish. I actually attended a marriage of a friend of mine who was a member of this church. Then there are the Maronite Catholics, who say Mass in Arabic, and whose churches look more like mosques than a cathedral. The reason it's called the Roman Catholic Church is because it's centered in Rome, and is the Latin Rite, R-I-T-E. So every major religion has a split in either sect, denomination, or a rival faction. Some are very friendly to each other, and others go to genocidal wars against each other. Yet, in fantasy and D&D, they all seem to be a homogeneous group, single authorities without any disputes within them. There's a certainty that just doesn't exist in many religions. And speaking of ambiguity, let's take a moment to talk about how many people don't understand their own religions. We like to think that misinformation is a new thing, like organizations or people in power have started to use the internet or mass media to influence people into thinking that their brand of nonsense or truth is correct. But this has been a conflict within religion for as long as there have been people claiming to hear the divine. I once had a conversation with an Orthodox friend of mine who said that unlike any other form of Christianity, Orthodox Christians all believe the exact same thing. There was no variation like there is within other Christian denominations. So while two Catholics can disagree on a point, Orthodox Christians are always on the same page. It was hard for me not to laugh or ridicule him. If you're watching, buddy, I'm sorry. This is just an impossibility. So for me, this is a point of realism that you can add to your implementation of fantasy religion, and a pet peeve that leads to people being absolutely vile to each other. There is little thought that goes into bad information. Here, I will speak mainly about Roman Catholic theology and the history because that's my bread and butter. I know that the citations on this particular video are not as large as the video would suggest, but comparative religion and religious history are topics that I've studied for over 20 years at this point, and I don't even remember all the books that I've read on it. Now, I can give you just a hint of what this means within Catholic dogma. I am not talking about disputes that create new religions. We've already covered that previously. I mean folks of the same religion, the same sect, the same group, who don't believe the same thing, not because of some theological dispute, but because one or both of them are wrong about the tenets of their own faith. I mentioned previously the Catholic dogma and writings surrounding non-Christians entering heaven. That's just one example. I've experienced disputes on a range of topics, from the inclusion of LGBTQIA+ folks in Christianity, to translations of ancient Hebrew, to the elimination of the limbo of the infants hypothesis, to the whole harder for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle than a rich man to enter heaven. While that last one might seem like a rather uncontroversial statement, you may be surprised at the discussion folks are having about it. There is incredible inconsistency within a religion, especially of those things outside of the core tenets. Basically, anytime the religion faces a situation in the real world that wasn't contemplated, a fork in theology occurs. Fantasy religions seem to veer away from tenets or core beliefs, almost as a way to dodge the hard questions that religions face when people start practicing them. Conclusion. I understand that my experience is not what many others experienced, and I understand why so many have a negative view on religion. I'm still very critical of it. I can see the stains. Even though I don't consider myself Catholic, I'm more critical of the current Pope than most. Both because he's much more in line with the old guard than his public relations team would have you to believe, and because I want to put him on a pedestal. He should be. He's the Pope. Religions are much more diverse than people think. As with anything, you can do with this information whatever you want. When it comes to the types of game masters, I feel like there are those that like to create worlds full of whimsy, where magical and wonderful things are commonplace, and nothing is intended to make sense. These worlds are fantasy in multiple senses of the word. Then there are game masters where you will, through the course of your campaign, know what the primary cash crop is for a kingdom, or know that the Republic next door is engaging in coin clipping to bring down their enemy's national economy. I find myself more in the second camp. When I see religion and fantasy, I see a tool for storytelling that is being woefully misunderused. Misunderused is not a word. When I see religion and fantasy, I see a tool for storytelling being so woefully underused, primarily because we don't like engaging with religion and how it operates in our world. For some, it's because looking at religion in this way may change the way we look at our own faith. Most people like to think of their religion as magical, eternal, unchanging, when in reality, religions don't really behave in that manner. Others have had such a hard time with religion in the real world and how it causes conflict and trauma for them, they don't want to use it in their game. That's valid, and your game is your own to deal with. I just hope that this can offer some guidance and inspiration for those who wish to engage with it in the future. And as always, thanks for watching. Thank you all for making it to the end of the video. I want to give a big shout out to my patrons who make these videos possible, especially my executive producer patrons, Caleb Blackie, Les Howie, Ryan, and Sidekick. And a big shout out to the biggest patron that I have, my spouse. I know it's been a while since I've released a video. My family had a new addition to it. It was my third child was born this year, so I took some time off to focus on my family for a few months. But I'm back into the swing of things of making videos, and I want to make a lot more videos for you all in the upcoming year. I want to be releasing a video a month in 2024 to really kickstart this channel. The growth has been amazing, even with my irregular upload schedule, so I really appreciate you all sticking around. I have some new ideas here and some Patreon exclusives coming up soon, so please check out my Patreon at www.patreon.com/legalkimchi. You can join for as little as $1 or even higher if you wish to. Thank you so much, and I truly appreciate your support.